Okay, everyone, it's 6 o'clock. We'll call this meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Before we get into the meeting, I'd just like to take a moment that we had a long-term employee pass suddenly, Pam Camo, this weekend, and maybe recognize a moment of silence for Pam. Thank you. Okay, we look for approval of the agenda with motion. So moved by Councillor Sanford, second by Councillor Birtles. All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. There's only one item of business on tonight's meeting, and that's the Town of Lunenburg Fiscal Needs Information Report. So I'd turn it over to our CEO, Mr. Doyle, to get this started. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, members of council, for the opportunity to speak to you this evening about the topic before you. Now, I apologize in advance. It may be a little bit longer than I'm typically speaking for. My name is Jamie Doyle. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Town of Lunenburg. And for any of you that can't hear me, just put up your hand because I need to speak up. I see Ted's raising his hand. Okay. Sure. I have a very monotone voice and I have to keep speaking up. So this evening, I'll be providing some information for you all, just for information. I'm not looking for or requesting a decision of council this evening. This is also not an exercise to really try to figure out what happened in the past, but more so understand the current status and how we need to move forward. This evening, I'll provide a high-level overview of the financial requirements facing the town over the next 5 to 15 years-ish. Now, of course, we commonly refer to that as short, medium, and long-term financial commitments. Please note, we don't need to scramble with pens and paper to try to capture all this data. Within 72 hours, I'll provide this presentation publicly along with my speaking notes with all the numbers in there for you. I understand it's a lot of information, so I'd rather we just have a conversation. What we've seen so far is a consistent increasing capital requirement for aging and soon to be aging infrastructure. And please note, this isn't uncommon for towns in Nova Scotia. A lot of my colleagues are facing similar instances, some greater, some less. In this presentation, I'll highlight a few areas to inform council of the absolute necessity of a comprehensive financial plan. Our staff have done a wonderful job ensuring operations continue, and in most cases, with the exception of the last year or so, have been very much in a reactive state, when in reality, we need to be in a more proactive state. We've identified 4 major areas for capital spend requirement with no financial ability at this time to commit to them in totality. And those 4 areas we've bucketed were buildings, infrastructure, water and wastewater operations, and of course, the electric utility. Please note, the figures you'll hear throughout the presentation this evening are estimates only. Confirmed numbers can only be determined once we hit design and tender processes. Second slide, please. Thank you, Trevor. Firstly, I'll broadly go over the buildings and asset portfolio. This is really the crux of the matter. We have approximately 10 assets that generate less than $500,000 a year. They're going to require more than $40 million over the next 10 to 15 years, as a lot of them are hitting their end of life cycle. Understand again, this is an estimation in today's dollars, not next month, next year, but today. It'd be incredibly difficult to pinpoint a percentage of inflation in today's world, but I believe it's safe to say that costs year over year will continue to rise. Notable, our water and sewer plants generate 1.7 million and 1.6 million respectively, but that revenue is explicitly used for the operation of those utilities. They have been highlighted in this presentation so as not to lose sight of them. Next slide, please, Trevor. First, we'll start with this building and the old fire hall. The old fire hall has a carrying cost of approximately $25,000 per year. It varies since 2018, with the lowest cost of just over $23,000 and the highest cost just over $32,000. This cost does include fuel, insurance, water and sewer, etc., as well as debt servicing. We do carry a debt of $12,000 on this asset. This building is in poor condition overall and only being used for storage at this time. If we were to rent the building, we estimate an initial cost of $1 million to bring this space to a rentable state. An investment of minimum $2 million would be required to make this building tight, improve this in structural integrity and the energy use. Town Hall is a bit of a different animal. While we do not carry debt on the building, it does cost more on a yearly basis to operate and maintain. These costs range from $55,000 to $85,000 per year, the cost of fuel being one of the major contributors. This building is in poor condition and requires upgrades to both exterior and interior to bring it up to current codes and standards. Accessibility codes to make it more structurally sound and more energy efficient. There's an immediate spend in this year's capital budget of $100,000 to repair the retaining wall that's on the Townsend Street side. We also anticipate a $5 million spend on exterior upgrades, as well as a $5 million spend for interior upgrades. I should note that we've made application for significant grants, but we have no word yet on the success of those applications. Next slide, please, Trevor. As you can see in the two highlighted buildings, the water treatment plant and the armories building, they also require capital investment. The town does carry a debt of about $365,000 and carries an operating cost of nearly $365,000. This asset is in good condition. However, it does not negate the need for good capital planning to ensure its life cycle is maximized. In this capital season, we allocated nearly $10,000 for routine maintenance of the water treatment plant. The armories building, although in poor condition, has no immediate concerns, but the building is aging and will require condition improvements. In next year's capital budget, we expect to propose an allocation of $50,000, give or take, for exterior improvements such as painting and windows. In the longer term, 5 to 7 years, will require an allotment of nearly $4 million to improve building structure, energy efficiency, paved parking, and safer access and egress on the Townsend Street. We'll also need to improve the workshop, new floor, oil separation tanks, designated welding area, etc. Next slide, please, Trevor. Pictured here are some infrastructure assets, 2 pump houses and a raw water intake building. These assets are in reasonable condition, but do carry capital costs totaling approximately $60,000. In the coming years, nearly half coming in the 23-24 capital program. The other half in coming years, so less than 3, would capture items like windows, doors, siding, and concrete work. Collectively, these assets generate an operating expense of $50,000 to $85,000 per year. Next slide, please, Trevor. The wastewater treatment plant, that's pretty self-explanatory. This asset is in fair condition and will see significant improvement with a $10 million plant expansion upgrade. The town's contribution is nearly $2.6 million. Final costing to be determined at the design and tender process. The town's financial commitment will be from investment and debt. Financial commitment will be from investment and debt and reserves. This asset carries an operating cost of approximately $740,000 per year, and we carry a debt of just over $188,000 for the plant and $424,000 for distribution. Next slide, please, Trevor. As noted, these are sewer lift stations on Brook Street and Blue Nose Drive. These assets are in fair condition and require capital investment. We're estimating $150,000 for roofing, interior and exterior works, heating, and LED lighting. We also need to invest nearly $500,000 to expand the building footprint of the Back Harbor Lift Station on Oxnard Drive for improved workspace that would involve stage construction with multiple trades, installation of LED lighting, and water service installation. Next slide, please, Trevor. The Victoria Road building, as pictured in the slide, has no outstanding debt and is in fair condition for its use as a storage facility. Our estimated capital investment required is $10,000 in the 23-24 budget for a new overhead door, $40,000 in the 24-25 for re-siding or portions thereof. We'll require $500,000 in the medium to long term for building envelope upgrades and $25,000 in the same time span for a washroom in the carpenter shop. Next slide, please, Trevor. Although this building is leased, it is in relatively poor condition and will require capital investment. In the short term, we anticipate a cost of nearly $13,000 to repair and or replace windows and casings. In the long term, we anticipate a capital investment of nearly $2 million for interior and exterior upgrades. Next slide, please, Trevor. The current fire hall, as pictured here, is in good condition, with the apron, which is the front of the bay doors, in poor condition and will soon need replacement. We do not carry any debt. Over the past 3 years, completed 2 capital investments, several heat pumps totaling $26,000, and an exhaust extraction system in 22-23 totaling $116,000. Over the next 3 years, we anticipate a capital investment required of about $90,000 for roof reseal and repaint, and $145,000 in the 25-26 capital budget for the concrete apron replacement. In the long term, we anticipate a capital investment of approximately $1 million to maintain the condition of the fire hall. Next slide, please. The public washroom is in generally good condition, but does require some upgrades, windows, paint, and roof patching, etc. In the short term, we can expect to invest $15,000, and in the long term, approximately $200,000. Next slide, please. The community center and arena pictured here is one of our highest revenue producing buildings, at just about $300,000 on average per year. Our expenditures, however, are close to $500,000 per year. These costs, both in and out, capture grants, rental rates, and cost to run and operate the facilities, and this includes salaries. These buildings carry a debt of just over $75,000. The arena is in relatively poor condition, and we anticipate a short-term capital investment of 23-24 of approximately $50,000 to address accessibility issues, as well as a compressor overhaul. The community center is in fair to poor condition, with an estimated $5 million to restore the building to a good operating condition, building envelope upgrades, accessibility upgrades, and a new auditorium floor, etc. Next slide, please, Trevor. Before I move into the infrastructure section, we'll lastly discuss the academy. As everyone is aware, the town is working with the Lunenburg Academy Foundation, or I'll call it LAF from here on in, to better understand costs associated to operate and maintain this asset. Through that process, the LAF is undertaking an assessment report to determine the short and long-term upgrades required for this building. In generalities, the cost to operate this building ranges from a small surplus of less than $30,000 to a cost of nearly $40,000. And please note, this does not include capital costs. Over the past 2 years, the town has not invested in any capital improvements to the building. However, from the years of 18, 19, and 20, there was a capital investment of approximately 2.1 million. Notable, the town did not foot this entire bill, as there were provincial and federal grants and some donations. The building itself is in fair condition. The heating system is starting to near the end of its expected life cycle. The foundation is currently in poor condition, and the energy efficiency is very poor. This is where the largest capital investment for this asset is. To summarize, the Academy on face value and operations can be a wash, but in the upcoming 3 to 5 years, there will be significant capital investment required. We always seek out available grants, but we can't count on them until we have the money in the bank. I also think this is a great opportunity to state that we're not intending to sell this asset on the open market. We'll continue to work with the LAF, and if that does not work out, we'll bring the conversation back to council at a regularly scheduled meeting to discuss next steps. Next slide, please, Trevor. As you can see, infrastructure is broad and encompassing topic. In our assessment, we've taken a few projects of recent and extrapolated broad costs that will be required over the medium to long term. Our paving, and I emphasize paving only, of Duke and Prince was nearly $500,000, and we have over 250 blocks to maintain and life cycle. Apply that cost, the monetary commitment becomes monumental. We have anticipated sidewalk replacement at nearly $1,000 a meter. Sidewalk renewal, which is just fixing it, at $500 a meter. These estimates are not internally driven, but they're driven by consultants and contractors, and we service a debt in this area of $403,000. Now, if we start to speak about water and road work replacement, it's more than $2,700 a meter. As we move towards our next capital budget cycle, which would be in the late fall, we need to build a reliable financial plan that includes multi-year capital spending combined with responsible borrowing strategies. Although we plan for and anticipate granting from other levels of government, we cannot depend on them. In that same vein, we cannot depend on land sales, as we cannot predict what that outcome will be. We can, however, begin to understand tax revenue that will result of land development in perpetuity, not just immediate injection of capital cash, although that's certainly nice. Through the next budgeting cycle, staff will propose budgeting that uses borrowing and grant synergies and other available tools to move forward in this most financially responsible manner. Next slide, please. As you're all aware, a sustainability report was tabled at the April 25th council meeting. While staff are yet to bring forward options with financial implications, one issue is clear. There's a $15 million capital investment required to bring the aging infrastructure up to standards. The town would need to try and utilize borrowing options to invest in the utility, as well as hire additional staff to ensure the utility remains at a sustainable service level. Next slide, please, Trevor. In closing, we have much work to do to turn the page to be an organization of proactivity rather than running year by year, crisis by crisis, to be reactive to our environment. Although I think everyone can understand there will be emerging issues throughout the years that require prioritization. We need to build a strong, solid, accountable, long-term financial plan that stewards this organization to a more sustainable financial model. We need to prioritize items within the CCP and overlay a sound financial plan that helps us achieve goals in a timely and financially responsible manner. I should mention that as of late, we've been working very closely with other levels of government this year to try and balance the cost of maintaining a UNESCO World Heritage designation with the financial realities we face. We are hopeful that we have more attention from those levels of government than ever before, and certainly do hope we receive some funding to help ease the burden of taxpayers. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Jamie. Well done. Does council have any questions of staff at this point in time?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you to Jamie and the staff for putting this together. I think it's one of the benefits of having someone come in new to the role to come in and look at things with fresh eyes and a fresh perspective, and to get the lay of the land to help us better prepare for what's coming ahead. So again, thank you for that. Many of the questions I had prior to the presentation actually were answered, so thank you for that. I want to talk about, you said some of the grant opportunities. When we're talking about grants, could you give us some examples of the type of funding we could look at? Most times when municipalities see funding, we get, it's a 50, 25, 25 kind of split where we're taking 25% and the federal government, the provincial government will pick up some things, or it'll be provincial responsibility. How much of what we're talking about here do you see as being eligible for funding?
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, that's a great question. I'll use a couple of examples. The wastewater treatment plant is a great example. We're committing 2.6 million, and the provincial and federal governments just about 7 million total. So that's a great partnership in how to pay for some of these things. In this building we're looking at now, in this entire block, we're hopeful that the Parks Canada will help fund some of that. And we did put in a very large grant application. Art, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's over 16 million. And that includes everything from some of the structural integrity issues, certainly through the roof and some of the brickwork. We've had destructive testing done recently, as you'll see some of that. So we're hopeful for some of that, but to determine what amount of this is eligible in this program for those, we'd have to sit and go through project by project as we go through it. So while it's difficult to determine the exact number, I know staff have been pushing every bit of grant application process that we can. This is the first that I think I'm aware of that we've made such an aggressive application process to Parks Canada help us out. One of which to help manage the UNESCO designation and the infrastructure that gets worn every single year, but also to start to rehabilitate this building. So although unfortunately, Councillor, I can't give you concrete numbers, we're hopeful for a higher than normal percentage.
I've got one more question and then I'll not hog the mic the entire time. In your report, one of the things you mentioned was we're trying to protect the integrity of the town's usable and sustainable assets. One of the things that people are concerned about, especially in this town, is heritage. What are the impacts on heritage, on maintaining these assets? Are most of these assets better to be town owned? Can we best protect them that way?
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, another good question. Certainly to be town owned if we had the available funding and support from other levels of government. The fact remains that we don't. I have some staff that's compiling a very comprehensive report to Parks Canada about the state of Lunenburg from a heritage perspective, how we've never received any money. I think we're the only one that doesn't receive money. I'd be embarrassed to try to figure out how much Quebec gets. So we're pointing out discrepancies like that to the provincial government to suggest that their lack of commitment to the town of Lunenburg to help manage these heritage designations and UNESCO is unacceptable. I think we've used very stern language in that report, which council will see in I think in June. We're going to try to get that here. That gets submitted to Parks Canada, who then turns around and submits it to the World Heritage Organization. So if we had the available funding support, sure, I think it would be valuable for the town to keep hold of these and steward them as necessary. But currently, we just can't afford it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Sanford?
Thank you. Through the chair to CAO Doyle. Just thinking about the electric utility and the end of life, and I've been given a lot of thought since that report was tabled, and it's very worrisome. And I I look at that and I look at that report and think about, you know, the benefits of maintaining and keeping the utility and the risks and the challenges that come along with that. And I think about the long-term commitment that I feel the residents of Lunenburg have to make to mitigate risk. And I'm wondering, how can we understand what the residents want in the context of the utility? Because I feel it's their long-term commitment that needs to guide us in our decision-making, because they're the ones that are going to be taking the risks ultimately. So while I could sit here and say, you know, I'd like to keep the utility because I like as a resident and for residents of Lunenburg to be able to have, you know, a discounted power rate. Maybe we can use it to attract business to the town. Maybe we can use it to support the solar garden without having to jump hurdles with somebody else owning the utility for us to be able to maximize that type of a project. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, it's the residents who have to make that long-term commitment to managing the risk. And how do we hear from the residents, particularly on that utility, and what they want to see happen with that? Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Sanford, it's a very good question. And as we had spoken about during that report, we're going to bake some options with financial accountability in there, bring forward back to council for discussion. I think there is certain risks. I'm not going to lie. At the 15 million, I think is the red herring risk. I think we could borrow to certainly service that. Of course, I can't sit here and say that rates won't go up as a result of that capital infusion. My concern with the utility from face value is the ability to keep a service level. I'm not used to power being above ground. So anytime the wind blows too hard, we start to lose power. So as we look at that option of keeping it, we also have to analyze the staff required to do that. In the report, if you recall, there's some highly technical skilled folks that we need to hire, like an engineer, of course. I can't remember the specific type, but certainly they're hard to keep and maintain, and it's hard to retain and attract staff at any level. So there's some of those questions that we need to look at as we bring it forward to council. I don't think that there's a sway either way. I think it's trying to flip all the rocks over and figure out which option is best for the town and which option is best for the residents. There's an option that's not in that report that I think should be looked at as well, and that's a merger with the other small utilities. I don't know what that looks like. I don't pretend to be an expert in electricity, but there would be some inherent value in that, I think, and we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't look at that option as well. So that's what we're going to be getting into and bring it forward back to council with some options. And Area, who I think we're all familiar with, they also want to have a conversation about leveraging other levels of government for funding to help for that 15 million. So there's lots of discussion to be had yet with some folks before we bring that forward to you guys. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Councilor Duggan.
So through the chair to the CAO, one of the things that's being talked about often is the increased tax revenue from housing sales. I'd like to know, I guess, how that's affecting our finances, if that's something that is that we're seeing growth in that area, and if so, is it significant?
Through the chair, Councillor Duggan, there is an increase, and I'll probably need Kathleen to help out in a little while. But the sheer number that we're going to try to grapple with over the next decade is fairly large. I don't think there's enough generated within that tax increase to really make a dent. Maybe Kathleen, if you can speak to any of it in further detail, but to the councillor's question, I don't think there's enough that actually sways it so much that we can take an option off the table. Thank you.
when you're looking at a $47 million investment that we're going to have to do over a number of years, we'd have to have significant assessment growth. Our growth is more the assessment increases that you've seen because of CPI than new development in our community. So I haven't done a thorough analysis to see how much of them were new accounts versus what were existing. But when we were doing our taxation this year, you could see that maybe we had about 10 new accounts that had been formatted since last year, which brought maybe $700,000 to $800,000 to the table for assessment value, not tax value.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? So
Through the chair, could you perhaps explain, when we talk about, short-term, long-term, I mean, what kind of schedule we're looking at? We're talking about having to do borrowing. So borrowing involves, getting the money, paying it back, opening up more capacity for borrowing. Do we have the ability, as far as a couple of things, the conditions the buildings are in, can they wait if they need to? Do we have the borrowing capacity to perform all the work we need to do over the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see this as a realistic project, given the state of the finances of the town at this point?
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, we are certainly approaching our borrowing limits. That's the importance of a financial plan to figure out what that looks like. We need to understand any synergies we can make there. And we do have some very talented staff that help us understand that. But she's one and she's sitting there. So we do need some help in that regard. As for the buildings, up until probably a week ago, if it rained, if I walked in the front door of town hall, I could watch the water pour in the front door at the top. So, I think things can certainly wait to an extent, but we really don't know the extent of the interior assessment once we start getting into it. So to sit here and look at it, you'd think, yes, it could wait a little while, but I'm not, a heritage or construction expert. I go by what we have just for the roof alone. And so I think we probably could wait a little bit, but we do have to understand what that confirmation is. Like, we need to act, and we can't just wait another few years before we decide to look. We have to start looking soon so we understand what that timeline looks like. Thank you.
anyone else have any questions? Councillor Sanford.
Through the chair. I noticed in our buckets, we've got infrastructure and we've got water and wastewater, but the point I want to make crosses both of those buckets together. And I'm wondering if we're going to have a really good hard look at what it's going to cost to separate that stormwater and the wastewater, so that when we invest the millions that we're intending to invest in the upgrades with the wastewater treatment plant, that we're not reducing the life cycle of the new treatment plant by sending that water runoff back to the plant to be treated. So are we going to be able to take a good hard look at what it's going to cost for us to separate, especially some of the heavy areas, to reduce that flow back to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment?
Through the chair to Councillor Sanford, yes, we are. Our town engineer, who's just sitting there, I don't think I have a conversation with him at any point in the day where he's not talking about separation of storm sewer. So I think it certainly would be remiss if we didn't understand the impacts of that activity combined with the new plant upgrade. I think it would be very counterintuitive to do an upgrade and not understand that impact. Maybe Tyson, if you want to add any technical aspect that you can.
Through the chair, we have the GIS modeling project that is nearing completion. And one of the main goals of that is to identify these kinds of projects that will give us the biggest impact, because we still need to be fiscally responsible with these projects. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have that, and that will allow us going forward to incorporate this thinking in our decisions.
Anyone else have any questions? Councillor Harrison. Tennis match here.
I was going to say, I feel like we're playing tennis. I do have a couple. I've got two questions, so I'll knock both of them out and save the volley if that's okay. One of the things we haven't addressed yet is the accessibility requirements for 2030. Were those factored in when we were talking about interior upgrades to this building? Just, I mean, so people understand by 2030, all government buildings are meant to be accessible.
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, yes, we understand there's accessibility issues. We face it daily between the entrances on both sides and public washrooms and things like that. So again, we'd be remiss if we didn't start to consider those into the renovations of our assets.
So that is included in that 10 million you were talking about earlier for this interior work.
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, yes.
And then finally, just in the preamble that we received before the meeting here, there was part where you mentioned that managing a building portfolio like this is outside the core function of a municipality. Could you elaborate on why that is?
Sure. Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, being in, I guess, if I call it the landlord business or leasing business and property owners, it's not typically in the core function of a municipality providing core service to residents. In this environment, of course, there's a number of heritage buildings that would certainly, if we had available funding, could fall within that, because it's up to us to make sure we maintain that heritage status and make sure that it's treated properly and stewarded well. So typically, the management of buildings is not in a core municipal function. Water, sewer, garbage pickup, street snow removal, things of that nature, more core services. Thank you.
Any further questions? I just have, if there's none, I'll just make a comment. I find these numbers daunting, almost incomprehensible, you know, when you're talking these type of figures. And I usually like to break it down, like, you know, to how it affects an average homeowner. An example that, you know, we're talking about divesting of some of our assets and buildings. An example that we could really, you know, put a number on and maybe make it look realistic would be when we sold the old library. So there we have, you know, we have real costs and we've turned it into real revenue. So I know you probably don't have these numbers at your fingertips, but it's something I may like to see come back another time. It's like, so when we had the ownership of the old library, it would have cost the average homeowner, let's just say $25. And now that it's in the hands of a private, you know, the private sector, now that creates a revenue for that household of, you know, $25. So then you have a $50 delta in terms of how much it's costing the average homeowner from, you know, ownership to private sector. Is that something that do you think possible to come back to us at another time?
To the Deputy Mayor, it's a good question. It's one I thought of often as we start to think about, you know, our building portfolio and what that looks like. We're challenged with trying to figure out the legalities of what data we can release on that land sale versus what's proprietary from the buyer. What I would suggest is that a property that we've owned and maintained that we no longer own and maintain, but now receive taxes in perpetuity from it's a win financially. So what I'm going to do, Deputy Mayor, if you allow me the latitude, is to understand those legalities a bit more so that what I do release is appropriate and above board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions of council, there is no other business on the agenda. So I would move we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming tonight too. I appreciate seeing you here.